You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Good Monday, everybody. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, presented by BuckeyeGrove.com. It is game week, and I am your host, Kyle Lamb here. It's time to talk some football. The Ohio State University Buckeyes and the Oregon State University Beavers doing battle noon on Saturday on ABC. That is a battle of the real OSU versus the fake OSU, and I will leave it to the imagination as for you to decide which one is real and which one is fake. Hint, the real one resides in the state of Ohio. I'll make that easy for you. Anyway, it is good to finally start talking some football. I have Ross Fulton, Buckeye Grove football analyst, coming on here later in the show as we will dissect what we expect from Ohio State coming up on Saturday. Later this week, I've got Mike Singer of BeaversEdge.com. He is the publisher of the Oregon State site on the Rivals Network. We'll get his views and his insight as to what Ohio State will be facing with this Oregon State team coming up on Saturday. So looking forward to speaking with Mike and seeing what the Beavers have to offer in the way of resistance when it all kicks off on Saturday afternoon from Ohio Stadium. That game, by the way, is right now, depending on where you look, teetering on a 37 to 38 point spread. So the Buckeyes are heavy favorites in this one, as you would imagine they would be. Look, I will say 37, 38 points is very, very difficult to overcome. I'm now factored into that 37, 38 point spread, obviously, is going to be the fact West Coast teams traveling east, playing a noon game. That's 9 a.m. local time out there in Oregon. So this Oregon State team is going to be, if they're anything like me, a little bit sleepy. And I'm sure that's factored into the spread. You know, the true talent level difference is probably going to be, 34, 35 points. You can generally factor in a couple extra points because of that early start with a West Coast team. But it'll be interesting to see how this game plays out with everything that has gone on in the month of August for Ohio State. Of course, the Buckeyes will be without Urban Meyer in this one. Ryan Day will be taking the lead. And this is something I want to get Ryan's thoughts, because Ross's thoughts with Ryan coaching this game instead of Urban, because, you know, there's a general rule of thumb, there's a general thought that Urban maybe is a little more conservative when it comes to quarterbacks, you know, throwing the ball. We know he has his handprint, his mark on everything that Ohio State's offense does, and maybe left to his own devices, maybe Kevin Wilson would run the offense a little bit differently if he had full control, if he didn't have Urban, giving his input on certain plays and certain policies or procedures when it comes to running the offense. And we know, there was a little bit of friction at times when Tom Herman was the offensive coordinator. We know Urban, maybe had not necessarily a different philosophy, because I think philosophy-wise, I think he and Tom had similar thought processes, but there are certain plays that maybe Urban would be more conservative of running as opposed to when Tom Herman was at the controls, and I think that would be the same with Kevin Wilson. So I'm not sure that come Saturday we will necessarily get a full glance at what we can expect from the offense. And it'll be interesting in these first three games with Oregon State this week and Rutgers next week, and then TCU in that big clash in Dallas in 3 weeks. We don't know for sure whether the offense will maintain this look, this feel, this consistency when Urban is back on the sidelines. But you know what? If my theory is correct, we might get a chance to let Dwayne Haskins go a little bit, and then maybe that will, if it's successful in those first 3 weeks, if there's anything to this idea that maybe Urban would not let him fly, let him rip as quickly and as easily, maybe he can establish himself, and then when Urban gets back, it'll be a little bit easier for Urban to let Kevin Wilson and Ryan Day go with it a little more. Maybe Haskins will let it fly, and they'll feel comfortable where he's at as a passer, and they'll open the playbook fully and not be afraid to let him do anything. Maybe they'll take shots downfield on first down with his arm. There are a lot of things that could go into this, and his running ability too. If they attempt to run the read option, it's not just a matter of can he deliver as a runner, but it's also making the right reads. Is he going to read the defensive end correctly, the defensive tackle, the linebacker, whoever is involved in that play, he's going to have to make sure he's making the right reads, because that's as much about being successful as it is just your ability to run. There are times where JT Barrett, he could make a good read or a bad read, but he had the ability to make the play with his feet, and that helps him overcome even the bad reads. And JT Barrett did not make a bad read very often. But I'll get Ross's thoughts on that. Looking forward to talking to some football about him, with him. And like I said, Mike Singer will be on the Friday show, and we'll get the Oregon State perspective as we head into our Saturday noon kickoff. That game is on ABC. You can watch that, of course, at noon. But the announcers, by the way, the broadcast team for that one is Dave Pask and Greg McElroy, with Tom Luganville doing the sideline reporting. So I know some of you, because it's ESPN, have already committed to putting the game on mute. That is up to you. I will personally have the sound on. I'm actually looking forward to this from the standpoint, back in the spring, I bought a brand new 65-inch television, a beautiful Sony Bravia 4K TV, and this is going to be the first regular season football game that I've had a chance to watch on this TV. I did watch the spring game, but I'll actually get to see any college football for the first time on this TV here this fall, so I'm very, very excited about that. In the meantime, this week I think I'll just find something on Netflix to watch and pass the time away as we count down the hours until college football officially begins. So before Ross comes on, I want to address a conversation that I was having on Twitter over the weekend, and particularly in the case of what we would call the bias fallacy. And it was linked to me by somebody, and I'm really appreciative that they showed me this, because I think this is a fascinating topic. There is a guy by the name of Nick Bird, who is a PhD candidate at Florida State University, and so he writes on his blog that he writes about philosophy and science of reasoning and well-being, and he wrote on the bias fallacy. And of course, the bias fallacy is one of many logical fallacies. There's a lot of them. There's confirmation bias. There's too many to go into to mention right now. But bias is one of the biggest one. And basically the gist of this, you've probably heard of the bias fallacy, but maybe not aware of what it actually means. You probably do know what it means if you haven't thought about it. But basically, the gist is this. It's like somebody says, well, that person is biased, so therefore what they're saying should be discredited. And you get this a lot, especially on social media, on message boards. You get this in sports all the time. You know how many times, and we're probably all guilty of this, I think we all, to some extent, use logical fallacies within our reasoning and within how we respond to one another. And somebody will say, and I'm sure I've gotten this a lot here throughout this process of covering this Zach Smith saga, especially when it comes to Ohio State, how it was handled, what legally could have or should have been done. But so many people from the outside, they see these columns that I've written, or the columns or Reddit posts written by, Ohio Attorney 14, the infamous Reddit attorney that I had on the podcast a couple weeks back. And they see these things, and it doesn't matter how well-reasoned, how factual, how accurate your posts are, what you're saying. It doesn't matter how accurate you are in stating your conclusions, your findings. You can be the most completely dead on, 100% accurate in everything you say. It can have great reason. It can be backed up in fact, research, and it doesn't matter. A person, let's use in this case a Michigan fan, and I'm not picking on Michigan fans because Ohio State fans are probably just as guilty in reverse of doing this to people that write on Michigan. But a Michigan fan will come in on Twitter. You've seen it on the timelines. I know I've seen it. And, Ohio State fans will say, see, look at this column, read it. Kyle wrote this. And, he has tremendous insight, tremendous findings. He sticks to the facts. He's not, he's not biased. He doesn't go off the script. But it doesn't matter because they'll say, well, he's an Ohio State beat reporter, so therefore, he's wrong. And that's all it boils down to with these people is that in their eyes, because you're an Ohio State beat reporter, you're wrong. And this is a fascinating topic for me because the concept of bias in the media is not a one-way street. If you read something from any beat reporter, whether, in this case, whether it could be Ohio State beat reporter or whomever, it doesn't preclude the possibility that there's bias the other direction. Just because somebody is a national media guy, it doesn't mean they're without bias. Most of these college football columnists grew up a fan of somebody. There are some that are Michigan graduates and Michigan fans. There are some that are Alabama graduates and Alabama fans. There are some, we've seen a lot of these, in these cases, especially with Clay Travis, that are Tennessee fans or Tennessee graduates. Everybody to some extent has their own bias. And just because you're a national columnist or a national reporter doesn't mean you're free from bias. If you're a Michigan fan commenting on Ohio State's situation, are you really not biased? I mean, you can't say if you're an Ohio State fan looking at a Michigan angle or a Michigan fan looking at Ohio State angle, you can't claim there's no bias there because there is. We all inherently have bias. And so I get so frustrated as somebody who, by the way, I'm not an Ohio State graduate. I did grow up in a family full of Ohio State fans. I've been around Ohio State all my life. And the thing is, I'm not running from that. There was a time in my career when I was trying, like some of these young columnists and young writers, to run away from Ohio State. I didn't want to be linked with Ohio State because I was afraid it would damage my credibility. And this time around, being with Buckeye Grove and doing this podcast, to be honest, I don't care about that anymore. I honestly only care about having factual, rational opinions. Throughout this entire process, I was letting the facts guide my reporting and guide what I was saying on Twitter and on the message boards and writing on BuckeyeGrove.com. That's all I cared about. I put emotional responses aside. I put things that, all these irrelevant factors as to, whether Courtney Smith was actually a domestic abuse victim on behalf of her ex-husband, Zach. All of that did not matter to me because that was not relevant as far as it pertained to what was going on with Ohio State. Urban Meyer and his responsibility to report, his responsibility or obligation to handle the situation was not directly about whether or not domestic abuse occurred. It was strictly, what did the law say? What did he know? When did he know it? What did he do about it? And throughout this entire process, I think you would agree, if you followed me, that has been my main priority in this entire process. The only time that I really got emotional about this is really when I saw a lack of ethical reporting out there by people that who I'm talking about. And that bothers me, not as a guy that's been around Ohio State and is podcasting or writing about Ohio State. I can set those feelings aside. I can be objective. Last Wednesday, when Ohio State suspended Urban Meyer for 3 games and the final 23-page summary came out that night, I took the time to read the entire 23 pages. And I concluded, objectively, rationally, that Urban Meyer probably deserved a 3-game suspension. Not for the reasons that were stated, not for the reasons that they said. You know, the actual reasons that they gave for suspending Urban Meyer were bunk, okay? That's objective. But I concluded that it was fair to give him a 3-game suspension because I don't think he handled his personnel correctly. So I can be objective. So I can set all of my feelings aside and I can look at this from an objective point of view. So if somebody wants to say that I'm being biased and they just completely dismiss everything I've said, well, I've got words for those people. And there are people on the beat, and I'm not gonna go into details here, but there's somebody that has stated I'm being unprofessional because I'm being a homer. And no, that's not true. I'm not being a homer. Like I said, I'm okay with the 3-game suspension. I think it was fair. I think it was for the entirely wrong reasons, but I think it's fair. My biggest pet peeve throughout the situation is as a quasi-reporter, and side note, that's the funny thing about this. My main job is this podcast. I'm not, I'm not out there trying to be Woodward and Bernstein here. I'm just trying to give my views, but make sure that they are factual and make sure that they are, corroborated by fact. I don't have a problem giving my opinion because that's what this podcast is for. My job on this podcast is to give an opinion and to hopefully say something that you'll find entertaining, that you'll find insightful, that you'll enjoy listening to. But when I do report, and on the few occasions that I have, I'm certainly going to be letting facts guide my reporting. But because I care about factual reporting, when I see unethical reports come out and things that are completely untrue, and when I see reporters take no time or effort to get to the other side of the story and not correct correct inaccuracies, not to correct things that are lacking in fact, that bothers me. And I'm going to call that out. You can call that unprofessional all you want, but that bothers me. And even as a podcast host, I see a problem with that. And you get these young guys, 20-some-year-olds that are in the media, and they think to be a successful reporter, they've got to go out and shock the world. They've got to be seen as being tough on Ohio State, or being tough on Michigan if they're a Michigan reporter, or being tough on Texas if they're a Texas reporter. They've got to show that they're not biased, so they've got to go extra hard and try, go extra tough on the team and program they're covering. And I actually saw a couple people that have said, well, I'm hated by the team I cover and I'm hated by opposing fans as well, so I'm doing my job correctly. I say bunk. If you're doing your job correctly, you're going to be respected by the people that you cover. You're going to be respected by opposing fans as well, because you're attempting to go get facts and you're not trying to give your opinions on everything. You don't have to counterbalance fact-based reporting with extra opinions just so you can play both sides of the fence. That's not what being a good reporter is about. Professionalism is about getting facts. It's about being reasonable. And I see too many young journalists doing that these days, and they think they have to pander to the opinions of both sides to be an objective journalist. And that's not what it's about. That's not what I am here to do. I don't care if people think that I'm a homer. Just know that I'm not. I can be objective, and I can be right. The funny thing about it is when you look at reporting, a lot of hardcore, diehard fans of Ohio State, and I'm just using Ohio State as an example. This goes with any team, actually. Ohio State fans, some of them could name all 85 scholarship players on the roster. How many national media guys could come in off the top of their head and name the 85 guys on Ohio State's roster that are on scholarship? A few, maybe? I mean, it's possible there aren't any. I shouldn't say there aren't anybody out there that can do that, but there's certainly not many of them, right? That doesn't mean that Ohio State fans are always going to be rational or always going to think clearly on the situation. It doesn't mean that they're always going to be right. But just because they're Ohio State fans, it doesn't mean that they're wrong. They can tell you more about the facts of the situation than most national writers do because they care more and they've bothered to look into the details. There are certainly some out there, and it's okay that if this is you, just be honest if it is. But there are some that just want to bury their heads in the sands, and they don't want to know the details because they're afraid of them. And that's okay. You just got to understand that if you're one of those people, and this goes for national media and fans alike, if you're one of those people that have not bothered to read about all the details and learn about them, then you can't state with 100% certainty what the situation is. You got to be modest about it. You got to be humble. But the people that care, the fans, they're the ones that are going out and getting the details about a situation like this. And that's why you can't just discredit them just because they're a fan. If you're asking somebody who's more credible when it comes to Ohio State's personnel, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to take the hardcore fan that I am the national, columnist. And it's nothing against the national columnist. It doesn't mean that they're not knowledgeable about football, that they don't know what they're doing. But the fan might have more information on the roster. And that's where I'm at with this reporting. Just because you're an Ohio State fan, or in this case, just because I'm an Ohio State-themed podcast host, or I'm doing Ohio State-themed reporting to Ohio State fans, it doesn't mean what I'm saying is wrong. And shame on anybody for trying to say, well, he's biased, therefore he's wrong. Shame on especially other Ohio State beat reporters saying that. Because it's not about catering to an audience. It's not about making everybody hate you. It's about sticking to fact-based reporting. And that's what I'm trying to do. And I don't care what people think of me. Whether they think I'm an Ohio State homer or whatever. I'm not trying to hide who I am. I've been around Ohio State all my life. I don't care. There are some people that are so afraid to put the Ohio State University on their resume or on their background if they're an Ohio State beat reporter because they're ashamed because they want to look objective and they want to cater to everybody else that is not an Ohio State fan. That's not what I'm here for. I'm here to bring you the best coverage of Ohio State right now in this position that I can, whether that's writing about it on BuckeyeGrove.com or whether that's talking about it here on the Unscripted Ohio podcast. I want you to respect what I'm saying and not worry about who I am, because that's what it's all about. So is there bias in the media? Absolutely, but it's a two-way street. There's bias. There are biased Ohio State fans. There are biased Ohio State beat reporters. That doesn't mean they're wrong. But there are just as many biased columnists out there that have not dug in and actually gotten the facts of this case, and they're just as biased. You can't tell me that there are columnists out there that deep down inside aren't influenced and swayed by the fact that they grew up maybe disliking Ohio State, or maybe they grew up disliking, more recently, maybe they dislike Urban Meyer for whatever reason. It happens. It's human nature. We all have it. It doesn't make them wrong. It doesn't make us right. All it means is it's not about the bias. It doesn't mean that somebody that's biased can be right or wrong. It just means you have to dig deep and actually listen to what they're saying. That right there, my friends, is about being knowledgeable. It's about being informative. Find out what a person is saying. Don't dismiss them because of who they are. Anyway, rant over. That's what I have to say about bias in the media. Let's talk some football now with Buckeye Grove's football analyst, Ross Fulton.
Ross Fulton is here with his whiteboard to break down what the Buckeyes and their opponents are doing on the field. Can't see the whiteboard? Close your eyes and imagine really hard. It's time to go inside the X's and O's with Ross.
Pain heals. Chicks dig scars. Glory lasts forever.
All right, we are finally ready to talk some football because it is game week and Ross Fulton is going to be here. He is here, and we're going to get into some actual football talk. Ross, I know that's a foreign concept, but football is here Saturday, September 1st, noon kickoff on ABC, Ohio State, Oregon State. Are you excited?
It's pretty wild, given everything that's going on, that there is a game in less than a week from now.
It's pretty, considering everything that's gone on, it's actually pretty incredible to think that we're actually able to look forward to football for a change. What are you most excited for seeing on as far as Ohio State's roster, personnel? What gets you most excited thinking about Saturday?
I think I'm actually most excited probably to see how the offense adapts with having Dwayne Haskins at quarterback as opposed to JT Barrett. Both how the opportunities and challenges that presents with how the offense is by necessity going to have to adapt to the fact that Haskins is less of a runner than Barrett is, which means they're going to have to rely more on a diversified run game, run pass options, more on the passing game if they want to have the same level of success. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Do you anticipate they come out firing downfield? Do you think they throw Haskins out into the wolves right away and see what he can do? Because one thing I'm interested about this, because our theory is probably Urban maybe is going to be a little more conservative when he's out there, as maybe Kevin Wilson would be left to his own devices. So my theory, my hunch here is Saturday is Kevin Wilson, Ryan Day. I think they're going to throw Haskins out there into the fire and let him sling it. Do you agree with that?
I guess I can see it both ways. I wouldn't be surprised if they let him at least the first series or two get his feet underneath him and rely pretty heavily on J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber, but I could also see him come out slinging it pretty quickly. I think as much as Haskins is, the real question is how well can they pass protect? And, offensive line, I think, remains one of the biggest question marks that I have going into next week. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out up front as well.
There's a lot of, for what little we've seen of practice so far, the reports that have come out is that we're seeing Michael Jordan at center a lot here lately. Now, I know Brady Taylor's been out with some injuries. Do you expect to see Jordan up front? Because one thing we know traditionally with Urban Meyer is that he likes to get his most talented guys up there, and that means if he can find a talented guard and move him to center, I mean, he's had a lot of success with that. So I'm kind of thinking that Jordan wins the job. What's your take on that?
I tend to agree. Jordan is really tall to play center, so that always sort of raises a little bit of a warning flag. Not that I don't think it can be done, but it's generally not done. That said, I think that, if you want to get your five best on the field, I think that there's a pretty solid chance that him at center, just by the fact that I think a few of their guards, I don't know what Brandon Bowen's recovery situation's like, but between him and Knox and Malcolm Pridgeon, I think those three guys are all seem to be within the 5 or 6 best. So to get those, your 5 best out there, it seems likely that you're going to see Jordan at center.
We touched on this a few weeks ago, kind of talking about the offense a little bit, but I'm curious. So, what kind of tempo do you expect to see on Saturday? Do you think it's going to be much different? Maybe slower than last year we saw at times, maybe faster. What kind of feel do you see that playing out as far as how quickly they go?
Yeah, actually, this is the one area, even more so with the, slinging it around, that I could really see Kevin Wilson and Ryan Day left to their own devices going quicker than Urban Meyer may like. I think Urban tries to keep in mind at times the effect that the tempo has on his defense and special teams, whereas I think Day and Wilson are a little bit more apt. Now, granted, again, you have to get first down. So if you're, there's nothing worse than a 3 and out with tempo. But I think we will see, I expect actually a faster pace this year in general than they did last year.
And who knows, maybe we'll see see the tight ends incorporated a little bit on Saturday. What do you think?
Skeptical. I mean, I go back to, I think Urban Meyer, one of the good things he's done throughout his career is he, regardless of the position, he lists his best skill players and make sure that they get the football. And if I'm putting together a list of Ohio State's best skill players, I think the tight end might not even crack the top 10 right now. You have the 2 tailbacks. You have 6 or really 7 experienced, talented wide receivers. So you are really pushing it down. So I think, if my concerns about getting certain people the football, making sure I get it to my 2 tailbacks and Paris Campbell and KJ Hill from there.
Defensive side of the ball, defensive line, generic statement, not so much Saturday, but good as the hype, better than the hype, or not able to live up to the hype?
I mean, I think they're going to, I guess it depends on the hype, but I think they're going to be pretty darn good. I mean, it really helps to have that kind of depth inside. I think that Bosa and Draymond Jones are, probably as individuals more talented than, they had the depth at defensive end last year, but I think those two are really top level, which can solve a lot of issues. I for one, do not have any concerns about the defensive line. It's more the linebacking core on the defensive side that I'm interested to see.
When we talked about this, I think it was last week or the week before, we talked a little bit about the defensive backfield. What was your prediction for who the starting corners were going to be? I know, obviously, I think we're all on board with Arnett. Were you thinking Okudah or Sheffield at the other spot?
Probably Sheffield, but I'm not sure it matters a ton. I mean, I think the three of them are all going to play a lot of snaps. I presume that Arnett will continue to bump inside at nickel when on third downs. So I think those three will all see the field quite a bit. But I guess if I had to guess who will be out there the first snaps, I would bet on probably Arnett and Sheffield.
We touched on the Tough Borland stuff too. He seems to be way ahead of schedule. Nobody has said there's any chance of him being out there Saturday, but I get some kind of, I don't know, it's a weird feeling that it wouldn't be shocking if he ends up jogging out there for a couple plays. Am I being way off base here? Maybe somebody else has some information that's not even possible, but he just seems to be so far ahead of where they thought he was going to be.
Yeah, well, I would note that when Ryan Day announced the captains on Saturday, that they were in full pads, and Tough Borland was in full pads. And normally, you can obviously dress and be injured and be limited, but nonetheless, I mean, to be into full gear, I guess I would, again, if I had to bet, I think it's probably more likely than not that he doesn't play on Saturday, but I think that it seems like I would guess his timetable is sometime in September, sooner probably rather than later, and obviously by the fact that as a redshirt sophomore he was made a captain, I think that's a pretty strong statement that when he does return, he will return as the starting middle linebacker.
Yeah, just for the record, anybody listening here to the Unscripted Ohio podcast, don't go say, yeah, Kyle Lamb, he said Tough Borland was going to be back Saturday. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's just a hunch, gut feeling. I have no information on that whatsoever. So
yeah, I mean, it just I think people have been skeptical. I think we talked about this, the general public, but I think the coaching staff has been consistently optimistic since the spring about his return. And every time the limited times people have seen practice, he's taking the first string reps. He was named a captain. He was dressed the other day. So I think all signs point to, again, sooner rather than later.
So we had this question come up on Twitter for me. My Twitter is at KYLam8. Obviously, you can catch Ross on Twitter at RossGiblerBG. I'm sorry, I'm confusing Mark's Twitter with Ross R. Fulton.
Mark's Twitter as
well.
Yeah,
you can also tweet at Mark @MarkGiblerBG, but you can tweet Ross at Ross R. Fulton. I got that straight this time. But we had an interesting question, and so I'm debuting the Unscripted Mail segment. You can tweet at me, #UnscriptedMail with your questions, and I'll answer them on Friday editions of the podcast. But this question came up in anticipation of this segment, and I want to bring this to Ross's attention, get his take here. So we have 4 questions here, and I want you to give your take on all 4 of them. Number 1, who scores the first touchdown for Ohio State on Saturday?
I'd say the safe bet is J.K. Dobbins, but I'll go with Paris Campbell.
That's interesting. I actually went with Mike Weber Jr., so but yeah, I don't think you could go wrong either way.
No.
Biggest impact player on either side of the ball, or both sides of the ball, on offense and defense. We'll say that.
All right. Well, I guess I think Haskins probably for better or worse, if that makes sense. But I'd say Dobbins on offense and Bosa on defense. A pretty easy one.
Okay, this question was a little general, so I'm going to narrow it down. Freshman who will play? That's a big question,
yeah,
and
they're all going to play now.
Yeah, there's too many guys that are going to play, especially with the new rule change with redshirting. So let's narrow it down. Impact freshman you expect to impact the game on Saturday?
Yeah, so this is a little interesting, actually. I was actually thinking about this. I'm not sure there is a freshman right now that I would expect to be, let's say, even in the regular rotation. You know, certainly not like Dobbins last year or like Bosa the year before. I'd say if I had to pick one person right now, it might be Tariq Smith as the fourth defensive end, getting some reps during, during the heart of the game, so to speak. But I think that sort of remains to be seen.
Yeah, I was thinking Jeremy Ruckert, but, like you said, because you're not exactly optimistic about the tight ends being involved, I'm not sure how much of an impact he'll make, but I could see him in the rotation.
Yeah, tight end, I mean, that's another position. I would say, I still have 3 or 4, left tackle, a couple of the linebacker spots, and, I think tight end, I'm expecting Farrell to start, but I don't know what Rashad Berry's role is going to be. I mean, I think Rucker could certainly have an impact. I just think he'll be limited a little bit by his blocking early on.
So last question for you. You knew it was coming. People want to know it. Final score prediction.
This is don't make bets on me. What was the spread's like 30 something?
37-38 as we're recording this on Sunday at 37-38 range.
Yeah, I'll be a little conservative. I'll say 42-14.
I said 45-10, but I still have the Friday podcast to go. I may change that as I think about it some more, but I'm tentatively going 45-10.
Yeah, I just still think there's a few positions that there could be some hiccups in the first game. There's a little bit of inexperience, and not to mention obviously the coaching situation. So I think that's safer. Better be safer than sorry.
Ross Fulton, football analyst for Buckeye Grove. You can catch him on Twitter at Ross R. Fulton. Again, do not tweet at him, Ross Gibler BG. That will not help any matters whatsoever. So Ross R. Fulton on Twitter, and of course you can read his work on BuckeyeGrove.com. Ross, thanks for talking some football. Next Monday we'll be back and we'll recap the results of Ohio State and Oregon State.
Sounds great, Kyle. Thanks.
Before I wrap things up here on this Unscripted Ohio, I want to remind you, and I mentioned this earlier, we are debuting our unscripted mail segment. If you would like to have a question, a comment, or anything read on the Unscripted Ohio podcast, please email me at kyle@buckeyegrove.com, or you can tweet at me on Twitter at kylam8. Tweet your question, your comment, whatever you would like to say. Get it to me with the hashtag unscriptedmail. So tweet at me or email me any questions, comments you may have. Try to get them in by Thursday. That is when I record the Unscripted Ohio podcast for Friday. So I'm going to debut the unscripted mail segment on this coming Friday. So tweet me with your questions or comments. Include the hashtag unscriptedmail, or you're welcome to email me, kyle@buckeyegrove.com. Very much looking forward to that. Like I said, I will have Mike Singer, publisher of BeaversEdge.com, to break down Oregon State. The Beavers, what they're coming to Columbus. We'll talk about what kind of football team they should have in 2018. Mark Gibler, Buckeye Grove recruiting analyst, will be on Friday. We'll also talk a little bit of recruiting. We'll see what kind of prospects Ohio State will be bringing in for the weekend and catch up to see what's going on with the latest with the Buckeyes recruiting efforts with Urban Meyer serving a 3-game suspension. So join us again on Friday. We'll be back with the Unscripted Ohio podcast. Thanks for listening, everybody. Make sure you catch us on BuckeyeGrove.com on Mondays and Fridays. You can also follow and subscribe on the archives by searching Unscripted Ohio on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. We'll see you again Friday. Go Bucks.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.